A boat that was supposed to be empty just lit up at midnight, and nobody can explain why. If you are new here, subscribe right now, because what we are about to lay out tonight is not speculation. It is time-stamped, it is documented, and it directly contradicts the only official account that exists for what happened to Lynette Hooker. This is the Crime Files. No sensationalism, no exploitation, just evidence, just analysis, just the pursuit of truth. 3 weeks ago, we brought you the story of a woman who vanished on the water the night before Easter Sunday. Tonight, we are going back, not because the story has changed, but because the evidence has grown, because new details have emerged from footage, from witnesses, and from people who were there and who are only now beginning to talk. And because some of what we have found raises questions that the original account of this disappearance simply cannot answer. Let us start at the foundation. Lynette Hooker and her husband Brian Hooker had been living aboard their sailboat for 4 years. The boat was named Soulmate. It was a 46-foot ketch, the kind of vessel that becomes your entire world when you live on it full-time. Your bedroom, your kitchen, your living room, your storage, your everything, all compressed into the tight and efficient geometry of a blue-water cruising sailboat. Brian and Lynette had chosen that life deliberately. They had left the conventional routines of land-based existence and committed to the sea. By April of 2025, they had been doing it long enough that the boat was not an adventure anymore. It was home. On the evening of April 4th, 2025, the couple went ashore on Elbow Cay in the Abacos, Bahamas, for drinks at the Abaco Inn. They were not the only cruisers there that night. The Abaco Inn is a social spot for the sailing community in that area, a place where people who live on the water gather, compare notes on anchorages and weather windows, share meals, and decompress from the particular solitude of the live-aboard life. Brian and Lynette had drinks, 2 each, by the accounts that have been relayed. They were not falling down drunk. They were social. And then, sometime around 7 in the evening, they made their way toward the dinghy dock to head back to Soulmate. A photograph places Brian Hooker at the dock at 7 p.m. Exactly. Whether he and Lynette departed together at that moment, or whether she arrived separately or shortly after, is not something the photograph can confirm. What it confirms is his location at that time. 7 CBM. Brian Hooker, dinghy dock, Abaco Inn, Elbow Cay. From that dock, the route back to Soulmate runs out through the White Sound Channel and bends south into Aunt Pat's Bay. Soulmate was anchored approximately 150 meters from the shoreline. The transit in a small outboard dinghy under normal conditions takes 6 to 10 minutes. The conditions that night were calm. Multiple sources, video documentation, and marine weather assessments all confirm this. The sea was not rough. The wind was not howling. Whatever Brian Hooker later told investigators about the conditions, the documented record does not support that description. His account of what happened next is the only account that exists. And it goes like this. Somewhere in the channel between the dock and the boat, Lynette fell over the back of the dinghy. She went into the water. Her dry bag, which contained the spare key to the motor, went with her. The motor cut out. An oar he was using to try to reach her broke, the pin snapping, the oar lost. And then the waves, he said. The wind, the current, all of it conspired to push him away from her faster than he could fight back. He could not reach her. He lost sight of her. And then he was alone in the dark, drifting in an 8-foot dinghy with no power and no steering across the Sea of Abaco. He says he eventually reached the area near Lubbers Quarters, a nearby island. He says he anchored the dinghy in the shallows on the north end of Lubbers. He says he fired a distress flare. He says he spent the rest of the night adrift, unable to get help, unable to get to shore, until he was discovered by rescuers near Marsh Harbor at 4 in the morning on Easter Sunday, 4 miles from where he says Lynette went over the side. 4 miles, in an 8-foot dinghy, through a calm sea that he described as a violent storm. Now let us look at what the evidence actually shows. The first and most fundamental problem with Brian Hooker's account is the weather. His story requires extreme maritime conditions. Waves tall enough to obscure a person in the water. Wind powerful enough to push a small vessel faster than a person could swim or paddle against it. Conditions violent enough to render a former United States Marine completely helpless in a situation where his wife was drowning just meters away. Those conditions did not exist that night. Security camera footage from a property on Lubbers Quarters recorded the anchorage area throughout the evening of April 4th and into the early morning hours of April 5th. In that footage, the sea state is visible. The boats at anchor in the area can be seen. They are not pitching dramatically. They are not pulling hard against their anchor chains in heavy wind. They are sitting relatively quietly, swinging gently as boats do in light conditions. The documentation from that footage is consistent with what marine weather data from the area confirms for that night. It was calm. Not perfect, not glassy, but calm by any reasonable maritime standard. The second problem is the wind direction. When you look at the camera footage from Lubbers Quarters and you observe the orientation of the anchored vessels in the area, something specific becomes clear. The stern ends of multiple boats are pointing toward the camera position on Lubbers. That tells you something precise about the wind that night. It was coming from the southwest. Wind pushes boats so that their bows face into it and their sterns face away. If the sterns are pointing toward Lubbers, the wind is coming from that direction and pushing the boats away from it, meaning the wind was blowing from the southwest toward the northeast. That matters enormously for Brian Hooker's claimed drift path. He says he was pushed 4 miles northeast to Marsh Harbor, but a southwest wind does not push you toward Marsh Harbor from the anchorage at Ant Pat's Bay. A southwest wind in that configuration pushes you toward Lubbers Quarters. You would end up on the reef at the north end of Lubbers. You would not clear it and travel 4 additional miles to Marsh Harbor. The physics do not work. The wind direction documented in the footage does not produce the drift path Brian Hooker describes. The third problem is the timeline. And this is where the evidence becomes not just inconsistent with his account, but actively contradictory. At 7:47 p.m., surveillance footage captured a significant light event at the position in the water where Soulmate was anchored in Ant Pat's Bay. The position has been carefully established by cross-referencing the footage with fixed landmarks on the shore of Elbow Cay and with the known anchor position of Soulmate. The light event at 7:47 is not ambiguous. Something illuminated in that location at that time. Brian Hooker says the incident with Lynette happened in the channel between the Abaco Inn dock and the boat. He says it happened en route. He says they never reached Soulmate, but the transit time from the dock to the anchorage is 6 to 10 minutes. If they left the dock at 7 as or shortly after, they should have been at the boat by 7:10 at the latest, 7:15 at the outside. And at 7:47, the boat's security lighting appears to have been triggered. Soulmate was equipped with motion-activated security lighting mounted at the stern. This is not unusual for a live-aboard vessel. Sailors who anchor in remote bays install these systems to deter and detect anyone approaching the boat from the water. The lights trigger when something comes within a certain range of the hull, typically from the direction of the transom, which is where someone in a dinghy would approach to board. The way the light event at 7:47 appears in the footage, activating and then partially dimming before stabilizing, is consistent with someone approaching the vessel in a dinghy, triggering the security lights, boarding the boat, and then reaching the interior switch to dim or adjust the lights. That sequence means someone was at Soulmate at 7:47 p.m. on a boat that Brian Hooker says no one ever reached. Then at approximately 8 p.m., 13 minutes after that light event, multiple witnesses reported seeing a flare. The witnesses were not scattered. They were a group, more than 3 people, all together in the same location on Elbow Cay, all looking out over the water toward the anchorage area. They all reported seeing the same thing at approximately the same time. A flare, a distress flare fired into the night sky. Brian Hooker mentions a flare in his account. He says he fired one from his position near the north end of Lubbers Quarters after anchoring his dinghy there. He presents that flare as evidence of his distress, evidence that he was trying to signal for help after the accident. But the witnesses did not see a flare from Lubbers Quarters. They saw a flare from Soulmate, from the Hooker's own vessel, sitting at anchor in Ant Pat's Bay, not from a dinghy drifting near a reef island to the north, from the boat itself. Think about what that means in terms of Brian Hooker's timeline. He says Lynette went over the side somewhere in the channel, that he drifted to Lubbers, that he anchored there, and that he then fired a flare. That sequence of events, even accepting every element of his account as accurate, cannot be compressed into 15 minutes. The distance alone from where the incident supposedly occurred to the north end of Lubbers, drifting without power in calm conditions, is not coverable in 15 minutes. And the flare, according to the witnesses, came not from Lubbers at all, but from the boat in Ant Pat's Bay. There is no version of Brian Hooker's account in which a flare fired from Soulmate at 8 p.m. makes sense. He was not on Soulmate at 8 p.m. according to his own story. He was drifting in a disabled dinghy. Someone else fired that flare. Or he fired it himself from a location he has not disclosed. Either way, his account does not hold. Then the night continued, and the footage kept recording. At 12:27 a.m., the surveillance camera on Lubbers Quarters captured additional light activity at the position of Soulmate's anchorage. What appears in the footage is a moving light source approaching the stationary vessel from the water. The movement is consistent with a small boat, a dinghy, moving through the anchorage towards Soulmate. And as that light approaches the vessel's position, the security lighting at the stern appears to trigger again, just as it appeared to trigger at 7:47 p.m. At 12:32 a.m., 5 minutes later, a second sequence of activity was captured. Multiple brief flashes of light near the vessel, the kind of pattern produced by a flashlight being moved and redirected repeatedly, and then the security light activating again and remaining on for approximately 50 seconds before going off. At 12:27 and 12:32 in the morning, Brian Hooker had been adrift for more than 4 hours according to his own account. He was nowhere near Soulmate. He was somewhere on the water between the anchorage and Marsh Harbor, helpless in a small dinghy. No one was supposed to be at Soulmate. The boat was supposed to be empty, dark, sitting on its anchor with no human presence anywhere near it. The footage says otherwise. Someone was at that boat twice in the early hours of Easter Sunday morning. Someone with a dinghy and a flashlight. Someone who triggered the security lights, spent time at the vessel, and then left in the dark, in silence, with no one, apparently, the wiser. What were they doing there? That question does not have a confirmed answer, but the range of innocent explanations is narrow. A fellow cruiser checking on an apparently unoccupied boat out of concern would not be unusual, but such a person would likely have made themselves known, would likely have hailed the vessel, would likely have reported the situation to the marina or to authorities. No such report has emerged. A thief boarding an unoccupied vessel in the middle of the night is possible, but theft from a 46-foot liveaboard in a quiet anchorage would typically involve the removal of visible valuables, electronics, equipment, things that would be noted missing in any subsequent inventory of the vessel. The third explanation is the one that the totality of the evidence points toward most directly. Someone with knowledge of the vessel, knowledge of its security systems, knowledge of where things were stored and how the boat was organized, returned to Soulmate after the initial incident to manage whatever needed to be managed, to retrieve or remove or clean or alter whatever the boat contained that needed to be dealt with before investigators got access to it. Boats are evidence. Every surface, every fabric, every drain, every storage compartment on a liveaboard sailboat holds the material record of the lives lived on it. If something violent happened on board Soulmate on the night of April 4th, the boat would know. And whoever returned to that boat in the middle of the night would have known that too. Now let us talk about where the investigation stands and what the evidence requires going forward. The United States Coast Guard Investigative Services has been active on this case from early in the investigation. They are a serious federal law enforcement agency with significant forensic resources and a strong record of prosecutions in complex maritime cases. They have had cadaver dogs in the area. They have been on the docks. They have been interviewing witnesses and collecting documentation. Their work is methodical, and it is ongoing. The Royal Bahamas Police Force holds territorial jurisdiction over the waters where this incident occurred. Coordination between the RBPF and the CGIS is a necessary and ongoing element of the investigation. Cross-jurisdictional cases involving U.S. citizens on U.S.-flagged vessels in foreign waters are complex, but not unprecedented for these agencies. The process takes time. The process, when done correctly, produces results that hold up in court. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. That fact must be stated clearly and prominently. He is not under arrest. He has not been indicted. He has told his story to investigators and to the public. The investigation is ongoing. The legal process is doing what legal processes do, which is moving carefully, deliberately, and with attention to the requirements of evidence and procedure that any eventual prosecution will demand. But the contradictions between his account and the documented record are significant. They are not minor discrepancies that could be explained by the fog of a traumatic night or the imprecision of a shaken person's memory. They are structural. The weather was not what he described. The wind did not blow the way his drift path requires. The flare came from the wrong location. The boat showed activity at times when no one was supposed to be near it. These are not small errors. They are the kinds of contradictions that, when they accumulate, tell a story of their own. Lynette Hooker has not been found. Her body has not been recovered. The searches conducted across the Sea of Abaco have been extensive and have not produced results. The oceanographic modeling of where a person who entered the water at the location and time Brian describes would have drifted points to areas within the Sea of Abaco itself. Those areas have been searched. She is not there. That absence is evidence, not of any specific conclusion, but of a fundamental problem with the account of where and how she entered the water. If she is not where the physics of his story would place her, then either the physics are wrong, which the modeling experts do not believe, or she did not enter the water where and when he says she did. The geographic and environmental features of the area around the anchorage include inshore mangrove waterways that have not received the same systematic search attention as the open water of the Sea of Abaco. Those mangrove environments are physically close to the anchorage. They are accessible by dinghy in a short period of time. They are dense, root-choked, and difficult to search. They do not receive regular traffic from tourists or from locals. They represent a fundamentally different search environment that requires different tools and methods than the open water searches that have been conducted. A thorough investigation of this case requires that those environments receive appropriate attention. The evidence pointing away from the open water scenario and towards something that happened differently in a different location is strong enough to warrant it. If you were in the Abacos on or around April 4th and 5th of 2025, if you saw anything on the water that night, a dinghy moving through the anchorage, lights on a boat that appeared unoccupied, a flare in the night sky, anything that seemed even slightly unusual, please report it. The CGIS Tips application is available in your App Store. It is anonymous. Your information goes directly to the federal investigators working this case. Use it. Lynette Hooker was a real person. She had a mother who was waiting, a daughter who was waiting, friends who knew her before the boat, before Brian, before the Bahamas, and who are waiting for an answer that has not come yet. She deserves to be found. Her family deserves the truth. And the truth, piece by piece, timestamp by timestamp, witness by witness, is being assembled by the people whose job it is to find it. The sea was quiet that night. The cameras were recording. The witnesses were watching. And the evidence they captured does not match the story that has been told. This is not just a story. It is a real life, a real family, and a case that still has every answer waiting to be found. The search for truth continues. If this kind of careful, evidence-based investigation is what you come here for, subscribe now. Hit the bell. The next development in this case is coming, and when it does, you will want to be here. But there are layers to this case that we have not fully examined yet. Layers that extend beyond the single night of April 4th and that help explain not just what may have happened, but why the investigation is unfolding the way it is and what the people working it are looking for. Let us talk about Brian Hooker as an individual, because understanding who he is provides essential context for evaluating the account he has given. He is a former United States Marine. Military service is not a predictor of criminal behavior, and it should never be treated as one. But it provides context. Marines are trained to operate under extreme stress. They are trained to think clearly and act decisively when everything around them is falling apart. They are trained to assess situations tactically, to identify options, to execute under pressure. A former Marine who found himself in a genuine crisis at sea, his wife in the water, his dinghy disabled, darkness closing in, would be expected to respond with exactly that kind of disciplined, decisive action. He would not drift passively. He would not sit in shallow reef water when he could stand up and walk to shore. He would not spend the night doing nothing when the lights and sounds of civilization were visible in multiple directions. The behavior Brian Hooker has described is not consistent with Marine training. That inconsistency matters. He also spent his career as a telephone technician and installer for AT&T. He was a union steward, which means he understood systems and structures, understood how accountability worked within large organizations, and understood how to navigate those systems. He was technically sophisticated. People who worked with him described someone who understood how electronic systems operated at a fundamental level, and court documents confirm that he was separated from his employment at AT&T after manipulating the GPS tracking system on his company vehicle to disguise his actual location. That was not an impulsive act. It required specific technical knowledge, it required understanding what the GPS was recording and how the records were accessed, and it required a deliberate decision to falsify that record. The person who did that is the same person who is now asking the world to accept a story about a night on the water that does not align with the documented evidence. The behavior of someone who understands what is being recorded and tries to manage that record is not a new behavior for Brian Hooker. It is a documented pattern. Now let us examine the physical evidence questions that will be central to any eventual prosecution or formal resolution of this case. Soulmate is a floating crime scene if a crime occurred on it. Every surface of that vessel, every fabric, every drain, every storage space holds the material record of the lives lived aboard it. Blood evidence, even after cleaning, leaves traces that modern forensic techniques can detect. Luminol causes biological material to fluoresce under ultraviolet light. It responds to blood stains that have been scrubbed, bleached, and painted over. The sensitivity of luminol testing means that even heavily cleaned surfaces can yield positive results if biological material was present. And the pattern of those results, where the luminol responds most strongly, where cleaning efforts were most concentrated, is itself informative to an experienced forensic examiner. DNA evidence on a live-aboard sailboat is omnipresent. Two people living in an extremely confined space for 4 years leave their biological material everywhere: hair, skin cells, saliva. That baseline presence of DNA from both individuals is expected and normal. What forensic examiners look for in a situation like this is not the presence of DNA, but the pattern of its distribution and any anomalies in that pattern. Blood spatter analysis, if blood was present, can indicate the nature of an injury and the position of the person when it occurred. The distribution of biological material relative to specific areas of the vessel can indicate where events took place. Cell phone records are a critical category of evidence in any modern investigation. Both Brian Hooker's phone and any phone associated with Lynette generated data throughout the night of April 4th. Which cell towers did those phones communicate with? At what times? What applications were running? What searches were conducted? Modern forensic cell phone analysis extracts data that most people do not realize their devices are generating. Location pings, application usage logs, communication metadata, even deleted data, in many cases, can be recovered from device storage through forensic extraction. If Brian Hooker's phone was near Soulmate at 12:27 or 12:32 in the morning, cell tower records may reflect that proximity. If his phone was used to access navigation applications, communication applications, or search functions during hours when he claims to have been helplessly adrift, that data exists somewhere. Whether investigators have obtained it through appropriate legal process is something we do not know publicly, but it is data that would be sought in any competent investigation of this nature. The electronic systems aboard Soulmate itself may also hold records. Many modern sailing vessels carry chart plotters and GPS navigation systems that log position history. Automated identification system transponders, which broadcast a vessel's position to other ships and to shore stations, create records that are logged externally. If Soulmate's AIS was active on the night of April 4th, those records exist in systems that are not controlled by whoever was on the boat. They are held by the receiver networks that captured the transmissions. If the AIS was turned off at some point during the night, that absence is itself a data point. AIS systems on offshore vessels are generally left running at all times for safety reasons. Turning one off is a deliberate act. Financial records are another investigative avenue that would be standard procedure in any suspicious death involving a spouse. Life insurance policies, estate planning documents, beneficiary designations, recent financial transactions. The economic dimension of intimate partner cases is routinely examined because it provides context for motive. This is not an accusation of any specific financial arrangement. It is an acknowledgement that investigators follow established investigative protocols, and those protocols include examining the financial relationships between the parties involved. There are also the people who knew Brian and Lynette before and during their time on Soulmate. Friends, family members, people from their lives before the boat, and people they met during 4 years of cruising. Some of those people have already spoken, describing a relationship that had produced documented incidents of physical violence, photographs of injuries, medical records, court proceedings. The pattern of behavior within the relationship is part of the evidentiary landscape. Lynette's own words communicated to friends during and after incidents of alleged violence are part of that record. She photographed her injuries. She sent those images to people she trusted contemporaneously at the time they occurred, with messages describing what had happened. Those contemporaneous communications carry significant evidentiary weight. They are not retrospective characterizations of a relationship. They are real-time documentation by the person who was experiencing the situation, preserved in the accounts and devices of the people she sent them to. That evidence does not disappear. It exists in text messages, in email, in whatever applications she and her friends used to communicate. The pattern of violence described by people who knew the couple, combined with the pattern of behavior documented in court records related to other family members, and combined with the documented tendency toward technical manipulation of evidence, creates a context that investigators cannot and should not ignore. None of it constitutes proof of what happened on April 4th, but all of it is relevant to how investigators evaluate Brian Hooker's account and how they prioritize the lines of inquiry they pursue. Now let us return to the question of where Lynette is, because that question is the heart of everything else. She has not been found. The searches in the open water of the Sea of Abaco have been thorough and have not produced results. The expert analysis of where a person who went into the water at the described location, at the described time, under the described conditions would have drifted points to areas that have been searched. She is not in those areas. The conclusion that the evidence pushes toward, not as a certainty, but as the hypothesis that best fits the available data, is that Lynette Hooker did not enter the open water of the Sea of Abaco at the location and time described in Brian Hooker's account. That whatever happened to her happened in a different way, possibly on board Soulmate, and that her remains were moved to a location that has not yet been searched or that has been searched inadequately given the complexity of the environment. The inshore mangrove areas surrounding the anchorage represent that kind of environment. Dense, complex, root-choked, difficult to search from the air or from a conventional vessel, accessible by dinghy in a short period of time from the Ant Pats Bay anchorage, not regularly visited, not monitored. The kind of place where concealment is possible in a way that open water simply is not. Search efforts that focus on these environments require different tools. Cadaver dogs working from small vessels able to navigate the narrow waterways. Divers with the ability to work in confined root structures under low visibility conditions. Systematic coverage of waterway networks that are not easily mapped from the air. It is difficult work. It takes time. But if the evidence continues to point away from the open water scenario, this is where the search needs to go. The investigation is not over. It is not even close to over. 4 weeks into a complex maritime investigation with cross-jurisdictional elements, a missing body, and a surviving spouse whose account contains multiple documented contradictions, the work that has been done so far represents the foundation of what will eventually be a much larger evidentiary structure. Investigations of this type are measured in months, not weeks. The public-facing silence of law enforcement during this period does not reflect inactivity. It reflects the discipline required to build a case that will hold up under the scrutiny of a criminal trial. The timestamp on that surveillance footage does not change. It reads 12:27 a.m. and 12:32 a.m., and it shows light activity at a vessel that was supposed to be empty. That fact is in the record now. It will remain in the record. And whatever it ultimately represents in the full context of this investigation, it is a piece of the truth that cannot be made to disappear. Lynette Hooker deserves to be found. Her mother deserves to stop waiting in the particular horror of not knowing. Her daughter deserves the kind of truth that allows grief to eventually, someday, become something livable. The truth is there. The cameras captured pieces of it. The witnesses hold pieces of it. The boat holds pieces of it. The water and the land and the mangroves may hold the most important piece of all. The investigators are looking. They will keep looking. And when they find what they are looking for, the record of how they found it, the evidence they assembled, the contradictions they documented, the timestamps they preserved, will tell a story that is more complete and more honest than the one that has been offered so far. This is not just a story. It is a real life, a real family, and a case that still has every answer waiting to be found. The search for truth continues. If this kind of careful, evidence-based investigation is what you come here for, subscribe now. Hit the bell. Turn on notifications. Because this story is not finished. The next development in this case is coming, and when it does, you will want to be here.